So today's daf on Motzaei Shabbat is daf Yud, and we're going to start. I know he got up to the two dots on daf Yud Amud Aleph, which is not really a reasonable place to put two dots, to be clear. But we're going to start actually at the last word, last line of Tet Amud Bet. That's what Nava got up to.
Yeah, that's what I did too.
And that makes a lot more sense, to be honest. So we've been having a long conversation yesterday and the day before about how to count to creation, to the world, to the Romans, not the Romans, the Greeks, right? And how exactly to look at numbers in the star. Of course, this came about because our Mishnah talked about how we celebrate the holidays or don't celebrate the holidays of the non-Jews. And we started talking a lot about what the holidays of the Romans were. And it's not today's daf, it was 2 days ago, but I'm sure those who actually know something about the Romans, which does not include me, had a lot of more excitement with these names that are, probably have a lot of reflection in the history, because the Gemara, of course, the Mishnah was written in Roman times, right? So they clearly had a lot more intimate knowledge of that. Of course, there are a lot of edits and addendums and censors. So, there's a lot to learn about that. But today's daf starts with a story. On the bottom line of Tet Amud Bet, Ahu Shtara, there was a document that said that, Ruvain lent $1 million to Shimon. It said in it, Shit Shnin Yiterata, 6 extra years, meaning the year, let's say, was 2000 and what are we, 25? And in the star, it said 2031. So they found the star that said on July 1st, whatever today is, on June 28th of 2031, Ruvain borrowed $1 million from Shimon in a star, whatever number. So that seems very odd, right? Why in the world would someone write that in a star? If Ruvain lent money to Shimon, he would want to write the date of today. Of course, the major implication of a star is that a person has to pay you back. But the second implication is that if you sold any property after the time of the star, that property goes to the one you own the loan to, right? If Shimon sells his house after he borrowed money from Ruvain, that house, those lekuchot, go back to Ruvain. So the date on the star is very, very important. So they found the star that was written 6 years ahead of time. Savur Rabbanan Kamei de Rav Lememar, the Rabbanan in front of Rav thought to say, Hai Shtar Mucharu. This is a Shtar Muchar. Basically, Shimon said to Ruvain, look, I need to borrow $1 million, but I also have a lot of business deals going. You better trust me if you lend me $1 million, that I'm not going to be able to pay you back anytime soon, but maybe in a decade or two, when my startup takes off, I'll be able to pay you back. But do me a favor, if you write that I borrowed money from you today, no one else will buy my property, because they know that if they ever buy property from me, you're going to come collect it from them. So give me a star that's post-dated 6 years, which is a long time, right? And that means that for 6 years, basically, you can't collect. So, again, that would be a very unusual arrangement, but it's not unheard of. So for the Rabbanan thought that's what it was. It was a shtar muchar. It was written with a later date. You have to basically hold it until that time comes. You cannot collect things that were sold in between, because the shtar basically only goes into effect 6 years in the future. So that's how they thought to understand it. Oh, that's very weird. So Amar Rav Nachman said, I have a whole nother explanation for the shtar that makes much more sense. Hi Safra Dukna. This is a Safra Dukna. Rashi says Safra Dukna. I think Rashi says something like that. Is an expert sofer. Where's the Rashi? There we go. Midaktik b'cheshbonot, right? He's midaktik. He's really, really smarter than you, so you don't understand it. Katve, he wrote the shtar. Hanach shit shnin demalchu be'elam. He's actually going, the shtar, remember the general shtar was written to the times of the Greeks, right? So let's say I use the year 2025, which is not a Greek date, of course, it's a Christian date, right? But the Greek date, let's say it was 400, right? And this year it happened to be, the shtar said 406. Says Rav Nachman, it's not that they wrote the shtar for 6 years ahead of time. It's that they really wrote the shtar for this year. Why did they write 406 if the year is really 400? Because although the Greeks became leaders in year 0, they were already starting the conquest 6 years ahead of time. So there were 6 years that the Greeks were kings or not kings, or leaders in Elam. I don't know exactly how we translate Elam in English. I don't know where it is. He says Elam, yeah. So the Greeks were leaders 6 years before. And so this Sofer basically knows a lot of history. And he's not counting from, like we would say 1776. He's counting from, 1770 or something, some other time, which was an earlier time in Greek history. So let's read that inside. He's a Sofer Dukna. He's counting the 6 years that they already Greek had rules in Elam. We don't generally count it. So we recall this year 400. Sorry.
So Elam was a Persian province southeast of Babylonia.
Okay.
Correct.
What is southeast of Babylonia?
Don't ask me.
It's in southwest Persia.
Persia. Okay, Iran maybe. Okay.
Yeah, Iran. Yeah.
So thank you. So so they basically were counting from a different time period, but it was actually this year. It's just that this year, by our count, is 400 years in Greek rule, but from the Elam days, it's 406. So, and Ubizmani Katve, it's actually written for today. The Tanya Rabbi Yossi Omer, in fact, there's a Braita that supports this. Rabbi Yossi taught in a Braita, Sheish Shanim Malchu be'Elam, that the Greeks were kings in Elam for 6 years, which is a very weird place to be kings because nowhere near Greece. But anyways, V'achar kach pashta malchutam b'chol ha'olam kulo. And then their malchut spread throughout the whole world. And again, I don't know anything about Greek history, so I don't know what wars were going on in the Persian area. Anyway, so that was what Rav Nachman said. Matkif Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Now the two dots. Ask Rav Acha bar Yaakov. That's ridiculous. Why are you making this assumption that the star that says the year 400, we keep using this year 400 if that's okay. The star that says the year 400 is really written for the star that says 406, right, is really written for year 400. They just sort of started the clock 6 years earlier. So it's 400 years in the modern era plus 6 years in the pre-modern era. Why don't you look at it completely differently? Because it only says the year 406. It did not say how many thousands, how many millennia. Maybe this sofer is counted to something completely different. Why would you assume that this is counted towards the Greek kings? Maybe, in fact, this sofer is counting Yetziat Mitzrayim. And now it turns out, if you do the calculation according to the Talmud, which is not, in the Seder Olam, which is not a calculation that's based on history, right? But is a consistent calculation that the Gemara sticks with and tries to maintain. There were basically 1,000 years exactly between the time the Jews left Egypt and the time that the Greeks became in power. Exactly 1,000 years. And the way the math works is that we learned this yesterday. The Greek date was 300, and help me if I make any mistakes here because there's a lot of details here. The Greek date was 380 years, I think. Yeah, 380 years before the destruction of the temple is when we call Minyan Shtarot of the Yevanim, right, when the Greeks became in charge. But if you do the math, the amount of time between Yetziat Mitzrayim and the destruction of the temple was 1,380 years. So exactly 1,000 years more. What's the math? I'll do it for you quickly. Rashi here does it. The tradition is that the Jews were in the desert for 40 years, right? That's pretty clear in the Torah. The tradition, this is not so clear in the Torah, is that the Jews had 410 years passed before they built the Beit HaMikdash, before Shlomo built the Beit HaMikdash. So together it was 450 years, I believe. I think I'm off.
440. What isn't it? 446.
Sorry, 480 years. 480 years. So it was 440 years plus 40 in the desert. So 480 years between the time that they entered Israel and built the first Beit HaMikdash. Right. The tradition is that the first Beit HaMikdash stood for 410 years. So if you add 480 to 410, you get 990. Right. 890. Then the exile was 70 years, and the second temple was 420 years. So if you add 890 and 470, you get 1,000. Help me out here. 1,380. Okay, 1,380. And the tradition is that the Greeks also started 380 years before. So basically, the year of Yetziat Mitzrayim and the year of the Greek rule is the same year, except 1,000 years apart. So says the Gemara now, back to our Gemara, how do you know that that's not what we're counting to? Maybe he's counting to Yetziat Mitzrayim. He forgot, he didn't forget. He left out the extra 1,000. He's only talking about the most recent century, right? Not century, millennium. And in fact, it is a shtar mu'uchar. Says Rav Nachman, that's a very fanciful and creative interpretation, but it's wrong. Bagola ein monin ela malchei Yavanim bilvad. In the Gola, I guess in Bavel, we only write shtarot to one calculation, to the Greek kings, right? And that's the only way you calculate things. And now, who suffered the right? He thought Rav Yaakov that Rav Nachman was just pushing him off, and he was just arguing with him. But Nafak Dach, he went out, he searched for Ashkach, and he found a Braita, the Tanya, Bagola, Emonim elamachei Yivanim bilvad. That's the only way you count in the Gola, is the Malchei Yivanim. And so this shtar, which now is written incorrectly, is probably this crazy explanation that they wrote it to a different calculation of the Greek kings, because there's a different calculation. And so that's how we calculate. Of course, it's very intriguing today. We don't do this, of course, right? So if you, in shtarot that we do, I don't think we do it. I mean, we definitely don't do it commonly, right? But we always write, I know in Ketubot, of course, we write, the minyan sha'anu monin kan, right? We always say to the minyan that we count in this place, because obviously in different countries or different areas, you'll count to different things. We count, to Briat Olam, or we count to Christian dates, whatever you count to. We don't count to the Malchei Yavan in our things. The Rambam definitely did. The Rambam always wrote how many years he was away from Malchei Yavan. I know that. So, anyways, continues the Gemara. Amar Ravina Matnita Namideka. Says Ravina, the Mishnah actually, in fact, implies this as well, that we count nowadays to the Greek kings. It's not, because we had the first Mishnah in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, which said, Bechad b'Nisan Rosh Hashanah l'Melachim u'leregalim. That the first day of Nisan is Rosh Hashanah for kings and for the holidays. Remember, we talked about the holidays extensively in Rosh Hashanah, that if you say you're going to give a karban, Balta Acher, starts with Pesach anyways. But what does it mean for the kings, right? Now, Amrinan, the Gemara said in Rosh Hashanah, L'melachim l'may hilchata. Why do we care when the king's new year is? And Amar of Chesed l'shtarot. It's for a document, right? Because if a person becomes king in Shvat, then when Nisan comes, they become the year 2 of their rule. So if you wrote, I borrowed money in Tammuz of year 2 of the rule, that means that if they became king in Shvat, that it was 8 months later, 6 months later, right? It's not 2 years later. It's not. Now, the problem is that the Mishnah continued in Rosh Hashanah and said, Be'echad b'Tishrei, the first day of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah l'shanim l'shmitim. It's Rosh Hashanah for the years and for Shemitah. Now, of course, we know Shemitah means you start counting Shemitah and Yovel on Rosh Hashanah. But what does it mean it's Rosh Hashanah for the years? And Amar of Chisda, or some have Rav Papa on the side here, l'shtarot. It's also for documents. That documents start in Tishrei. So the Gemara, of course, asked in Rosh Hashanah, Kashi Shtarot Ahadadi. How could the Mishnah say that Nisan is the beginning for kings, and we said king is for Shtarot, and Tishrei is for years, which means for Shtarot. So which one? And the Gemara answered in Rosh Hashanah. This is all a review from Rosh Hashanah. Umishaninan, we answered in Rosh Hashanah, Kan Malchei Yisrael, Kan Malchei Ovdei Kochavim. That it depends on whether you go with Jewish kings or non-Jewish kings. The Jewish kings go after Nisan, and non-Jewish kings go after Tishrei. Right, so therefore, depending on whether you're counting to Jewish kings or non-Jewish kings, it would make a difference. And of course, nowadays, and this is the part that's left out, that I'll read that inside. Sorry, the Malchei Ovdei Kochavim Tishrei Maninan, the Malchei Yisrael Nisan Maninan. Malchei Ovdei Kochavim go with the the Rosh Hashanah, that's the real Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, which is Tishrei. Malchei Yisrael go with Nisan, which is the beginning of the year for the Jews in this case. And Anan, says the Gemara, us nowadays, Hashtem Tishrei Maninan. We know that all our shtarot reset in Tishrei. Tishrei is when we have a new year. So it must be that we're counting to the non-Jewish kings. If you're counting to Yetziat Mitzrayim, now remember, Yetziat Mitzrayim was not a king, but it was a Jewish event. So then Nisan Ba'inan the Minli. Then it should start from Nisan. You see that the right way to count is from the Greek kings or Greek rulers and not from the Jewish events. And therefore, that's how we should assume a shtar that's not otherwise written is meant. Now, of course, if you write in the shtar something different, if you say this is the 6th year since I graduated high school kind of thing, that is grounds you in that event, right? But you have to, if you don't write anything, stam is Malchei Yevanim. Okay, continue the Mishnah now at the 2 dots, more than halfway down. The next thing in our Mishnah was, what's the... Well, Charlie, you speaking to us?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't catch you.
Yeah, so this dating according to the Greek kings was well known in the ancient world, and even the Eastern Roman Empire used it. And it started in 311 or 312 which was the date that Seleucus, who was one of Alexander's generals, took over Babylon. And the thing about starting in Tishrei versus Nisan, Rabbi Nachman Cohen actually wrote a sefer about this. And I don't remember all the details, but it causes confusion because some people apparently used one and some used the other. And the date for the destruction of the temple is off by a year or two, depending on which you count. And this dating system was used by the Jews in Egypt until the time of Radvaz, according to Wikipedia. That he got the Egyptian Jews to do what the rest of us were doing and count from the beginning of the world. And the Seder Olam is famously missing about 160 years or so.
Right. So thank you for sharing all that. Yeah, Tosfos discusses some of that because your dates are, I don't remember what exactly you said, 300 and something?
311 or 312, depending on whether you're Tishrei or Nisan.
So, like I said, our tradition is that this is 380 years before the destruction, and the tradition is the temple is destroyed in the year 70, right? So 311 or 312 would make that 381 or 382.
Exactly.
There's a lot of debate about whether 70 counts from zero, when you start zero, what year 69, right? So this all comes in.
There was no year zero in the Julian or calendar because zero hadn't been invented yet.
So anyways, but like you said, it's very practical, and there is a lot of debates, not for us as much, but the biggest practicality is, of course, when you count Shemitah from, which we do today, right? And there are different, Rashi has a calculation, Rambam has a calculation, Tosfos has a calculation. They're all different, by the way, and so they're all 1 year off. So you can imagine that there's a lot of uncertainty, but we are going to...
They're off by a year.
Right. But
we actually do count a particular year as Shemitah today, and that matters.
It certainly does. So, okay. So on that note, let's continue the two dots. The Mishnah said that the next thing that's a holiday that you're not allowed to do business with the non-Jews is Yom Ginusia Shel Malchehem, the Genusia day of their kings. What does that mean? Ma Yom Ginusia Shel Malchehem. Says Rav Yehuda, Yom Shema Mindidim Bo V'Dichavim Et Malkam. It's what we would call the coronation day or the allotment day, the day you make him someone the king. So that day is a holiday. Says Gemara, but that's clearly not what it means. So Tanya, the Braita says, Yom Ginusia Yom Ginusia and Yom Shema Midim Bo Malkam. So the Braita says they're two different things. There's the day you appoint a king, that's a holiday, but there's also Yom Ginusia. Answers the Gemara, Lokashi Hadidei Hadibrei. One is a king himself, that's Yom Shema Midim Bo Malkam, but the other is his son. When a king abdicates or passes on leadership to his son, that's a huge celebration for him, and so it's also a holiday. Ask the Gemara, but that's not what happens. So Mukmi Malka Bar Malka, do the Romans, Rashi points out, we're talking consistently in our Mishnah about Roman rule, right? Do the Romans appoint a child to succeed a father? The Caesars were not hereditary. Hatanya, Hatani Rav Yosef, Yosef quotes the pasuk in Ovadia, which says, Hine katani taticha bagayim. I made you the smallest among the nations. What does that mean? Obviously, Rome is not the smallest among nations, but it means She'em Moshivim Melech ben Melech, that they never have a lineage in Rome. They never make a king after another king. They all take over a new person. And so there is no such thing as a king after a king. And then just to continue the Braita, Bazoyatam Od, you're going to be very low class, maybe I'll say, or Bazoy, embarrassed. Sheilam Loktav Lashon. They don't have, again, you can argue about this all night, but we're not going to. They don't have a writing or a language, that the Roman language is borrowed from others. They stole it from maybe the Greeks or maybe, I don't know. Anyways, again, not tonight's discussion, but it clearly doesn't mean their son because there's no such thing as hereditary rule in Rome.
Well, once in a while they did that, but it was the exception. But the more interesting thing is they did not call their emperors kings until late, really very in the West, very late in the times of the empire. They absolutely did not call their emperors kings.
I don't want to get too distracted, but there's a Tosfot, I think on Amud I don't remember where it was, who actually goes through where we get the word Caesar from. And he brings this tradition that the original Caesar of Rome was cut out of his mother's belly on her deathbed, and Caesar has something to do with the Greek word for cutting out or something. It's a very interesting.
That's where the term Caesarean section comes from.
Okay, there you go. But anyways, so, but back to our Gemara. So it can't be a son. Answers the Gemara, you're right. It means a birthday. Where am I? Ella Mayom Ginusia Yom Haleda. It's the birthday of the king. So the king's coronation day is a holiday. The king's birthday is a holiday. Asking Mar, but that also can't be the case because there's a Braita that says Atanya in the Braita Yom Ginusia v'Yom Haleda. The Braita says both are separate. So Lokasha Adideh Adebrei. Well, one is his birthday and one is his son's birthday. When the heir has a birthday, that's also a big celebration. Iva Tanya, but there's another Braita. You wonder where all these Braita would come from. That says all four. Yom Ginusia Shelo, Yom Ginusia Shel Beno, Yom Haleda Shelo, Yom Haleda Shel Beno. So clearly, you can't explain that Yom Ginusia means the birthday of his son. Ella says, let's go back to our original pshat. My Yom Ginusia, Yom Shmamidim Bo Malkam. Yom Ginusia is the coronation. Maybe they didn't call it coronation, but the day that they appointed someone the king, the Lokashia, and we asked before, what do you mean? That says in the Braita separately. Hadideh Hadibrei. In fact, we're going back to our original answer that a king would celebrate his own coronation and that of his son. You're going to ask, Mukmi Malka Bar Malka, that in the Roman method, they didn't have a king be the son of another king or an emperor or Caesar be the son of another Caesar. Says, well, sometimes they would. If they got permission from the Senate, right? If they got authority, you could sometimes do it. So it wasn't an absolute, it was just uncommon because it wasn't hereditary rule, but there were occasions where it made sense, right? Kigon Asvirus bar Antoninus, right? Like Asvirus, the son of Antoninus the Malach. So Antoninus was the very famous emperor with Rebbe, and we're going to have him all today and tomorrow. And his son Asvirus also became an emperor after him. Now, let's get to some good agarata about the Roman emperors. Amrle Antoninus the Rebbe.
You just mentioned, Marcus Aurelius, his son, did become emperor. He's known in history as Commodus, not Severus, who was a later emperor. But this proves that we were responsible for the decline and fall of the Roman Empire because Commodus was the first catastrophe Roman emperor in a century. And the Roman Empire never really recovered from him. So, unlike the protocols of the elders assigned, we were not responsible for the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, but according to Talmud, we can be arguably responsible for the fall of Rome.
Okay, Charlie, we're going to focus here. It's late at night. Amrle Antoninus le Rebbe. Antoninus, the emperor, said to Rebbe Yehuda Nasi, who wrote the Mishnah, Be'ina d'yimloch Asvirus b'ri tachti. I really want my son Asvirus to be the king after me. It sounds like Charlie, like it was a bad idea, but he really wanted it to happen. And I want you to know, Rebbe, I want to ta'abed Tveria Kalnaya. I want to make Tveria, a city where all the rabbis lived, into Kalnaya, which was, I don't know what the English word is, but it was a city which was free of taxes, a rabbinic city, an academic, what do we call it, a nonprofit, basically, right?
A free community.
Free community, but it meant free of taxes because they were religious or they were academic, or like we would have today in the university.
Enterprise zone.
So the problem is, says Antoninus, that if I go to the Senate with these two ideas, they're going to kick me out. One of them, I can get by them. I get one pass, but I don't get two passes. He was a very savvy politician. Probably was true. So what do I do? He says to Rebbe. So Rebbe never answered him directly, but Rebbe showed him things. He's Aiti Gavra. Rebbe brought a man, Arkavei Achavre, and he had him ride on the shoulders of his friend. Okay, so one man on top of another. The Yavle Yona Li'ilai Biyade. He gave the top guy a dove to hold. Now, of course, the Yona is a siman for Yisrael, right? And he said to the bottom person, who's a siman here for Antoninus, and his son Asvirus on his shoulders, Amar li'ilah, tell the upper person, meaning the person on your shoulders, to the mifrach min yade Yona, that he should send free the Yona. So what was the message here? So clearly the message was, Amar, what Antoninus said to himself was, Shema mina, you see, Hachi Kamali, this is what Rebbe is telling me. You should request from the Senate that your son Asvirus could be king after you, meaning appoint the one on top of you, your son on your shoulders, to be the next emperor. That should be your request. What about Tveria? Ema Leila Asvirus, you should ask Asvirus to make Tveria free. So you each get one pass. You get a pass to make your son. It's like wishing for more wishes, right? And then you get your son to free Tveria. The Ta'avid Tveria Kanaya. Amrle, now the next thing Antoninus said to Rebbe, 3 lines on the bottom, it's Sarina le Chashuvi Romai, that the people in Rome, the Chashuvim, the senators, are causing me tsaros. They're causing me all kinds of problems. So Rebbe didn't answer him, but Ma'ale Legina, Rebbe brought him up to his garden and Kol Yume Akale Pugla Mimisha. You take one turnip out of the beds. Kamei. Amr Shmamina, Rantina said, I see what Rebbe's trying to tell me. Hachin Kamerli, Katol Chad Minayo. Kill one at a time. Don't go fight against all of them. Take them out one at a time. That's much more effective. Says the Gemara on top of Yudam Abed. Why didn't Rebbe just give him advice? Says Rebbe, Amar Shami Chashuvi Romim and Sarale. The people hear that Rebbe is giving advice to uproot them and kill them, and they're going to cause Rebbe problems. Why can't he whisper it to him? Mishum Dichtiv, because the pasuk says in Kohelet, there's no such thing as secrets. Ki ofa shamayim yolichet hakol. Everything is leaked from every White House in all history, right? So don't ever say anything straight out that can be traced back to you. Now, there was a story, Habidahu Barta, the Caesar, what was his name? Antoninus, had a daughter, Dishma Gira. Her name was Gira. And Kavda Isura, she was not, she did some things wrong. She cheated on her test, which we see it was really sexual things. She was inappropriate, was znut. Shadrale, so Antoninus sent a message to Rebbe to find out what he should do. How does he help or how does he punish or deal with his kid? And he sent him a gargira. He sent him a gargira, which just remember her name was, what was her name? Gira, right? So Gira has gone astray. Gargira is in English. I read something like a watercress or something, or rocket. I read something. Yeah, some kind of plant. Shadrale. So Rebbe sent back to him kuzbarta. What's kuzbarta in English?
Coriander.
Coriander. Thank you.
Actually, it says this is the same in Arabic.
Oh, interesting.
My grandmother used to call it kuzbara.
Okay, so he sent him kuzbarta. Now Rashi says what Antoninus understood from this, what he was saying to him, kosbarta, cut off your daughter. Get rid of her, set her loose, kill her. But Tosa says that was a misunderstanding. It's not really what he meant, but that's what Antoninus understood. Shadrle, so Antoninus sent back to him Karti, which is our leaks. But the message was, you want me to actually cut off my daughter? I mean, I'm going to destroy my lineage. I'll have no more children. Shalachle, so Rebbe sent back to him Chasa. He sent him lettuce. But lettuce means, Chasa means have compassion, right? Chasa. So he's basically said, you can forgive her. So Rebbe, they were sending messages through vegetables, which is very fun, right? I'm sure you could eat them at the end, so that's good. Anyways, kol yuma avishadale dava pricha b'matrata. Every day he would take a basket and send them a basket full of gold coins from Antoninus to Rebbe. But he wanted to hide it so no one would know. So chiti apumai, he would put grain on the top. The oldest trick in the book, right? You put your drugs on the bottom and cover it with grain. So Amar lo, so he would say, Am tov chiti the Rebbe, bring this grain to Rebbe. Now, Amalei Rebbe said to Antoninus, I don't really need your money. I'm pretty rich too. Lo tzarichni, ritli tuva, I got plenty of money. Amalei, he said to him, no, I'm not thinking about you. I'm thinking about your children. Lahavi demanda batrach. It should go to your children, the ones after you. Yahavi the batrai, they should give it to the ones who come after me. Da'atu batrach, da'ati minau nepekalayo, right? You're going to be paying taxes for a long time to Rome. So this is an investment in a stable future.
He could get away with that. Gold is so much heavier than any grain.
It's a good question. Nakarta. There was a nakarta. Nakarta is a tunnel, like a nikur is like a hole in the ground, like a crevice. So there was a tunnel. There was an underground connection from the house of Antoninus. Antoninus must have had like some summer home in Tzipori to the house of Rebbe. Now every day when Antoninus went to visit Rebbe, he would bring two servants with him. One he would kill when he got to Rebbe's house because he didn't want anyone to report on this, so he had to keep them silent. One he would kill when he got back home. Tosis is a little bothered that it seems a little inappropriate to kill people for this. So Tosis says, well, maybe because they were criminals, he would pick like condemned men and he would use them. Anyways, Amrle, so Antoninus said to Rebbe, when I come to visit you, lo nishkach gaver kamach, I don't want anyone else to be there, right? This has to be a completely private audience. Yumachad, now one day Antoninus shows up, he finds Rabbi Chanina bar Chama sitting in the corner. So he gets really upset. Amrle, he said to Rebbe, didn't I tell you that when I come to you, no one should be here? Amrle said, don't worry about Rabbi Chanina bar Chama. Lake din bar inash. He's not like a human. He's like an angel. He's got no human weaknesses. He's not going to tell anyone. Don't worry about him. Amrle, so now Antoninus said to him, Lema lahu avda degani abava dekam veleti. Rabbi Chanina bar Chama, go do me a favor. The servant who's sleeping at the door, tell him to come and visit me. Come in. Now, why was the servant sleeping at the door? Because he was dead. So Azal Rabbi Chanina bar Chama Ashkei Davi Kato. Rabbi Chanina bar Chama went to the door and found the servant was dead. So he said, well, how am I going to bring him back? I'm like, what do I do? If I go and say, I got bad news for you, Antoninas, your servant is dead, you're not supposed to be the one who bears bad news. You never know, they might cut off your head. So I don't want to tell him that. So I have a better plan. Let me just run away, right? Never go back. So Ashvike ve'ezal, if I leave him and run away, that's not appropriate. That would be diminishing the malchut. Antoninas asked me to do something. You've got to listen. So he came up with the third solution, which is, boy, Rachmi, he prayed to God, Alev, Achve, and he brought him back to life. Vishadre, and he brought him back to Antoninas. So he's like, okay, here's your guy. Amar, so Antoninas said, wow, okay, I'm impressed. Yadana zuti di'itvichu. I know that even now the young among you, or the limited ones, like, not the great rabbis, the students like Rabbi Chanina bar Chama, mechayim meitim. He can even bring people back to life. Okay, so I trust you. He's a pretty great guy. The mio, but still, Rebbe, I want you to listen to me. I really don't want anyone here, even a magical person. Now, Kol Yuma Havi Mishamish the Rebbe. Every day, Antoninas would come to Rebbe and he would serve him. Machale, he would help him eat. Mashkele, he would give him something to drink. Kavi boy, Rebbe the Mesik, the Porya, and Rebbe wanted to sit down on the couch. Havi Gochin, Kameh, Porya, he would lean down as like a footstool or to help him get down. He would go on his knees. Amrle, he would say to him, Sak levele Poryech, step over me or lean on me to get onto your couch, meaning use me as a crutch. Amar, so Rebbe said, 1 second, he said, Antoninas, this is not, you're a king, right? You're an emperor. I can't treat you this way. Amar said Antoninas to Rebbe, the first of the wide lines, I wish, mi is simenu matzah tachtecha olam haba. My dream is to be a mat under you in Olam Haba. I want to serve you so that I can be part of your chelek. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it basically for me. Amar le, so Rebbe said to him, Atina la'amada'ati. He said to Rebbe, will I come? Can you bring me la'amada'ati? And Rebbe said, I'm like, in. Rebbe said, yeah, I can bring you. You can get, you non-Jew, Antoninas, can get a portion of the world to come. Amar le, so Antoninas, who was very educated, obviously, said, Achtiv, Pasuk says in Ovadia, lo yiyes sarid leBeit Esav. There will be no remaining part for Beit Esav, meaning there's no future. There's no Olam Haba for anyone from Beit Esav. Says Rebbe, that's Be'oseh Maseh Esav. That's if you remain in the actions of Esav. But you, Antoninas, who acted kindly to me and to the Jews, you won't be able to get a portion of Olam Haba. In fact, there's a brayta that says that. It says in the pasuk, the Beit Esav, there'll be no remainder for the Beit Esav. Yachol l'kol, you might think it means all Beit Esav. Talmud Lomar the Beit Esav. Only if they're still acting like Esav. Amalei. So then Antoninas said, there's another pasuk in Yecheskel. He was very wise to the psukim. It says, and this is referring to hell, this pasuk in Yecheskel, to Gehenom, the opposite of Olam Haba. Shama Edom, there I will place Edom, Milacheha, its kings, the Chol Nisiyah, and all its Nisiyim, all its presidents. So it says that the kings, they will go to hell. Amalei said to him, no, it says Milacheha, but not Kol Milacheha. Right? Meaning the kings, but not all the kings. There are some righteous kings or righteous emperors who will be saved from Gehenom. And it says, Kol Nisiyaha, but lo kol Sareha. Not all what's Sarah? All the senators, we'll call them, all the Sarim. There's a brayta that says this, Melachah is lo kol Melachah. The kings of Edom, but not all the kings, meaning not Antoninas. And Kol Nisiyaha, Milo kol Sarah. Oh, let's read inside. Milacha v'lo kol malcha pral Antoninas ben Asvirus. Right? Antoninas, the son of Asvirus, so I guess his son was also Asvirus, was excluded, and he got a chelik in Olam Haba. And kol nisiyah means all the nisiim of Rome, but not kol sareha, not all the ministers. That is referring to the Ketia bar Shalom. There was a minister of Rome called Ketia bar Shalom who got a chelik in Olam Haba. What was the story? Asked the Gemara, since you're probably curious. Ketia bar Shalom Maihi. What was the story of Ketia bar Shalom who got a chelik in Olam Haba? Dahu Kesaria. There was one Kesar, not Antoninas, obviously. Davi Sani Yehuda. He hated the Jews, like most Kesarim probably, right? He hated the Jews and he wanted to kill them. So he said to his chashivim, his advisors, thank you, Mish alalo nima baraglo. This is a very Nazi kind of thing to say, by the way. Someone who has a nima, someone who has like a what's a nima in English? Like a prick, right? Like thorn, basically. Nima literally means a hair, but it means like a very, very small, uncomfortable thing in his foot.
Steinfeld says it's from a Greek word that means an expanding wound or gangrene.
Gangrene. Yeah, we're going to see what that means in a second. So you have a wound that basically, if you don't treat it, so what do? You cut off your foot, but yichya, you'll at least live. Or yinichana, you leave it there, and you'll die, right? So basically, he was comparing the Jews to this wound, that if you leave the Jews behind, they will eventually eat you out. But if you cut them off, you can live. So Amrulo, so his advisor said to the emperor, cut them out, get rid of the Jews, because we're never going to survive. They're going to take over us. Amrulo, Katia Bar Shalom, now Katia Bar Shalom, who must have been one of the advisors, raised his hand and said, that's a bad plan. First of all, right, you're never going to kill all of them. You know why you're never going to kill all of them? Because the pasuk says in Zechariah, it's a great pasuk. It says, "Ki ka'arba ruchot hashamayim parashti etchem." I spread you out to the four corners of the earth, like the four winds of heaven. Now, the weird thing about the pasuk is, Mike Amar, what does that mean? If it means if it means that you live in the four different directions, and it wouldn't say I spread you out ki arba ruchot, it would say bi arba ruchot, in the four directions, right? So hi ki arba ruchot, li arba ruchot, not bi, li arba ruchot ha mi boile. Ella, what does it mean that you're like the wind, like the four directions? El kishem sheyefshar lolam below ruchot, kach yefshar lolam below Yisrael. The reality is just like you can never stop the wind in the world. It's not something you can stop. You can never make the world free of Jews. So you're never going to succeed, said Katia Bar Shalom. And furthermore, it's a really bad PR thing. They'll call you a cut-off kingdom, right? The kingdom without the Jews, you'll be missing a pillar of your economy. All the doctors, bankers. Anyways, it'll be a negative on your kingdom. Amrle, so the Kesar said to Katia Bar Shalom, it's a good point. You speak smartly. Meimar Shaper Ka'amrit. What you said is good. Mio, the problem, of course, is that if you beat the king in an argument, we have to kill you. Called the Zachi the Machuta, Shatile, the Kemunya Khalila. They throw you in the Kemunya Khalila, which means the empty chamber. Like basically you get starved to death, right? Sorry, Rashi says it's a house full of ashes. Big, I don't know if it's hot or it's suffocating. It's not a fun place to go, and you get killed, right? So they killed him. They were taking him out to kill him. When he was going out to be killed, Katia Bar Shalom, there were some matronita. Remember, matronitas were always sort of matrons, but the people, I don't know how we translate them, but the ones who talked, who knew the history, they said, Vai yahavit michse, where am I? Vai le ilfa, the azla below michsa. Woe to the ilfa. Ilfa means a ship. Woe to the ship that's going without paying the tax. Meaning you're a ship, Katia Bar Shalom, you're going to the next world, but when you show up there, you're not going to have the payment that they demand, which was to be Jewish. So what Katia Bar Shalom did was, Nafal al Reisha de Orlata, he fell on his head of his orla, I guess with a knife or something, or a stone, kata, and he cut it off. And so he circumcised himself. And Amar, he said, Yahavit michsi, I gave the tax, right? Chalfit v'avrit, let me pass and get through. Sounds a lot like, going to whatever, the Greek stories. But basically, I circumcised myself, I'm passing, I now have paid the tax to get me to the world to come. Kika Shadile, when they were throwing him into this container in this house, Amr, he said, Kol nichsai Rabbi Akiva v'chaverav. All of my possessions, I guess he was a very rich man, he was a senator, should go to Rabbi Akiva and his friends. Now, of course, anyone who's written a will knows that's not a very good will, because how much does Rabbi Akiva get? How much do his friends get? So Rabbi Akiva, Yatsa Rabbi Akiva V'darshan, Rabbi Akiva V'darshan, it says in the pasuk by the what's it called? By the Lechem Apanim. Hayala Aranu Levanav, and we darshan that to mean Mechsal Aranu Mechsal Levanav. So I get half, said Rabbi Akiva. But either way, Katia Bar Shalom left all his money to Rabbi Akiva and Chaverav. And Yatzda Batko, when he was killed, a Batko came out, Va'amar, and said 3 lines in the bottom, Katia Bar Shalom Mizuman L'chayol Haba. Katia Bar Shalom got a place. So he's when we say the messenger, the Sarim, it's referring to Katia Bar Shalom. And of course, this is one of the examples where Bacha Rebbe cried by, if this is true that Rabbi Akiva was alive, of course, Rebbe was a couple generations later. But Bacha Rebbe, maybe when he heard the story, or he was a kid, and Amar, he said, Yesh konel lamo b'sha'ah achat, yesh konel lamo b'kama shanim, right? Some of us have to work for a whole lifetime to get a chelik in Olam Haba, and some get it in one moment, like Ketia Bar Shalom. So that's the other example of Rome besides Antoninus. Now, on that point, says the Gemara 2 lines from the bottom, Antoninus Shimsha the Rebbe, right? Antoninus was an emperor of Rome who served and attended to Rebbe. Adrachan, a guy named Adrachan, right? I don't know exactly who that was. Rashi is a non-Jew. Shimshei
of the Parthian Empire.
So he would be Persian, right? Because Rav was in Persia. So he was a Persian general or king who served Rav. Kishach of Antoninus, and when Antoninus died, Rebbe said about him, Amar Rebbe, Nitzparda Chavila, the tie has come untied, has come unstrapped, meaning the connection between us, Israel and Rome, and me and Antoninus, with his death, we've lost that connection. It's obviously has become a very famous thing to say, right? And Kishach of Adarchan, when Adarchan died, Amar Rav, Nitzparda Chavila, the attachments have gone. So they both mourned the death of their non-Jewish friends. So we will stop there at the top of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Tomorrow, in a few hours, I hope all can join exactly 9 hours from now. Is that right? 9 hours? Yeah.
I'll be up
We will start with the next. We'll continue the story about Onkelos Hager, who was also in the Roman Empire.
What a great Masechah.
So have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 7:45, I hope.
Yashikar.
Thank you. Shavua Tov.
Shabbat. Thank you.
Good night.